the last Empress of Austria, Queen of Bohemia and Hungary, a widow at 29, and a woman who, at the very moment her world collapsed, was carrying her 8th child under her heart. Her husband was dying at 34 from pneumonia on a Portuguese island, in a rented villa, without adequate medical equipment and without a country to return to. She nursed him herself. As he died, he told her he loved her, more than words could express. Those were his last words. The next morning, she dressed in black. She was still wearing black 67 years later, when she died at the age of 96. Think about that. The Austrian Empire she ruled lasted only 2 years. Her mourning for the man with whom she shared it lasted 67. This is the story of Zita of Bourbon-Parma, a woman whose mourning outlived her empire, and one of the most remarkable lives of the 20th century, almost entirely forgotten outside of Catholic and monarchist circles. On May 9, 1992, at the Via Pianori in Tuscany, Italy, a girl was born. She was named Zita after a local 13th century saint, a Tuscan maid from Lucca, known for her piety, humility, and the habit of giving her own bread to the poor. The name proved quietly prophetic. Her father, Robert I, Duke of Parma, had lost his throne in 1859 when Parma was absorbed into a unifying Italy. This detail is important. Zita grew up in a family that had already lost everything once and built their life around something greater than power. By all accounts, her father was a man of extraordinary warmth, gentle humor, and sincere faith. His family was exceptionally large. Robert had 24 children, 12 from his first wife, who passed away, and 12 from his second, Infanta Maria Antonia of Portugal, the granddaughter of the exiled king Dom Miguel. Zita was the 17th in total. The family moved between 3 homes on a private 16-car train. The children, always many everywhere, spoke amongst themselves in French, Italian, German, Spanish, Portuguese, and English, switching languages mid-sentence. Zita remembered her childhood as almost entirely happy. She recounted how she and her sisters would visit the sick and elderly in the village, returning home exhausted, only to be disinfected. Her mother taught her that charity was the best protection against the risk of infection. She would come to understand this lesson more broadly than any medicine. She described her father as the embodiment of joy and kindness, a man who never raised a hand to a child, but whose rare reproaches cut to the heart. And for the rest of her life, she held on to the lesson learned from her mother and her Portuguese aunts, exiled princesses who built lives of genuine meaning without thrones. Nothing in this world lasts forever. Worldly power is the most fleeting thing of all, and the only thing that cannot be taken away is love. In 1907, her father died. Zita was 15. She was sent to study with Benedictine nuns on the Isle of Wight in England, to the very monastery where her maternal grandmother, the Dowager Queen of Portugal, had taken vows and was now the abbess. There, between philosophy, theology, and music, Zita felt a genuine calling to monastic life. She did not become a nun, but the formation she received there, the discipline, the prayer, the conviction that the visible world is always in service to the invisible, held her together through everything that followed. Karl von Habsburg-Lothringen had known Zita for almost his entire life. Their families' paths had crossed since childhood, the same castles, the same summer visits, the same religious ceremonies, year after year, all across Central Europe. He was the great-nephew of Franz Joseph. She was the 17th child of a dethroned duke. At that moment, neither of them was heir to anything extraordinary. By 1909, something had changed, and just a couple of years later, the engagement was announced. The wedding took place on October 21, 1911, at Schwarzau Castle. Austrian historian Erich Feigl would later call it the last great wedding in Europe. 200 guests, royals from a dozen dynasties, and a waltz composed in Zita's honor for the celebration. What no one in that room knew was that the heir, whom everyone assumed would always stand between Karl and the throne, was less than 3 years away from assassination. The empire, visible from every window of Schwarzau Castle, was less than 7 years away from collapse. And the two at the center of it all, a couple everyone unanimously said were so obviously, so truly in love, had about 7 years of happiness ahead of them before everything would change. But on that October day in 1911, none of this existed yet. There was only the wedding, the waltz, a bronze statue delivered by airship from young officers who had heard of Zita's fascination with aviation. The honeymoon was a road trip across the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They were young, in love, and driving through an empire that had existed for 600 years and had only 7 left to live. Zita and Karl had 8 children. The eldest was Crown Prince Otto, born in 1912. He was followed by Adelheid, Robert, Felix, Karl Ludwig, Rudolf, and Charlotte. The 8th, Elizabeth, was born 2 months after her father's death, on May 31, 1922, in Madrid. She never saw her father. With these 8 children, the oldest just 10, the youngest not yet born, Zita found herself utterly alone. Without a country, without an army, without an income. Armed only with the realization that her primary duty was now right here. Zita refused to let tragedy turn her children into victims of history. She transformed them into its participants. Each received an education fitting the spirit of the Habsburgs, a strict Catholic upbringing, mastery of multiple languages, and a profound understanding of who they were and what it meant. When King Alfonso XIII of Spain offered to place Crown Prince Otto's education in the kingdom's finest school entirely under his patronage, Zita politely declined. She intended to raise her son according to Austrian and Hungarian traditions, under teachers she chose herself. The destinies of these 8 children proved diverse. Otto became the symbol of the house. For decades, he led the International Pan-European Union, later became a member of the European Parliament, and went down in history as one of the architects of a unified Europe. Robert engaged in political and humanitarian work. Felix and Karl Ludwig studied in Quebec, close to their mother. After the war, Charlotte spent several years working under a pseudonym in the United States as a social welfare specialist. Elizabeth, the youngest, married into the Prince of Liechtenstein's family. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo. Karl became the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. 5 weeks later, the First World War began. In November 1916, Franz Joseph died at the age of 86. Karl and Zita ascended the throne. On December 30th, 1916, in Budapest, Zita was crowned to the Hungarian throne. According to ancient tradition, the queen's crown was placed upon her head, while the holy crown of Saint Stephen, one of Europe's oldest royal regalia, dating back to the 11th century, was touched to her right shoulder as a symbol of sharing the burden of power. It was the last coronation in Hungarian history. They were 29 and 24 years old. They would reign for exactly 2 years and 12 days. Karl was no champion of war. He was a deeply devout Catholic who viewed his imperial role as a duty to his peoples, not a privilege over them. From his first day on the throne, his primary goal was to bring an end to the war. Zita was his closest advisor. Her biographer, Charles Columb, described her as possessing a vibrant personality, an iron will, and a superb intellect. She traveled with Karl to the front lines. She organized relief for the suffering, visited hospitals, and pushed for social reforms, workers' rights, better conditions for the poor, and the proper care of prisoners of war. Karl initiated secret peace negotiations through Zita's brothers, Princes Sixtus and Xavier of Bourbon-Parma, who were serving in the Belgian army, attempting to open a back channel to France and Great Britain. When the talks were exposed, German nationalists branded Zita a traitor due to her French Bourbon lineage. She endured this without a public response. The peace initiative failed. On November 11, 1918, an armistice ended the war. Austria-Hungary was dissolved. Ministers insisted on an official abdication. Karl refused, and Zita stood resolutely beside him. To those who pressured her on the matter, she made it clear that a sovereign cannot abdicate the way a minister resigns. A sovereign can be overthrown, which is fundamentally different, imposed from without, rather than surrendered from within. Karl signed a document relinquishing his participation in state affairs. It was not an abdication. This distinction was a matter of principle for both of them, and it defined the rest of Zita's life. In April 1919, they were forced to move to Switzerland. In 1921, Karl made 2 attempts to restore royal authority in Hungary. Both failed. The Allies intervened, demanding his permanent removal. Madeira was chosen. They arrived in Funchal on November 19, 1921. The governor met them at the pier. Zita was presented with a bouquet tied in blue and red, the colors of her grandfather, the exiled king of Portugal, Don Miguel. It was house arrest on an island under strained circumstances that bore no resemblance to the 50 territories listed in Zita's imperial titles. A rented villa near a hotel, almost no money. And then Karl fell ill. A cold, bronchitis, pneumonia. The island lacked adequate medical equipment. A first heart attack, a second. Zita was 8 months pregnant with their 8th child. She nursed him herself while also caring for her other sick children. She never left his side. She sat with him. On April 1st, 1922, Karl I died. He was 34 years old. As he lay dying, he told Zita that he loved her, that he had always loved her, more than words could ever express. Zita never remarried. The next morning, she dressed in black. She was still in black 67 years later. Zita left Madeira on May 19, 1922. A few weeks after Karl's death, King Alfonso XIII of Spain, acting through his ambassador to Great Britain, secured permission for Zita and her children to move to Spain, even though the Allied powers would have preferred to keep the widow of the last emperor far away from Europe. The invitation was accepted. Zita raised her children in the Uribarren Palace near Bilbao. There was no state income. She lived on the charity of sympathetic monarchs and the resources of the Bourbon-Parma family. In 1929, the family moved to Belgium, to Steenokkerzeel Castle near Brussels. She educated her children. She supported the dynasty as a living family, not as a political force seeking restoration, but as individuals with a profound understanding of who they were and their purpose. Her son Otto embodied this purpose with exceptional consistency. For decades, he chaired the International Pan-European Union, one of the intellectual precursors to the European Union, and subsequently became a member of the European Parliament. The exile of the Habsburgs, in an unexpected way, contributed to the building of a unified Europe. Then came 1938. Hitler invaded Austria, the Anschluss. Otto was sentenced to death by the Nazi regime for his open opposition to the annexation. Zita's family was on the hit list. On May 9, 1940, on Zita's 48th birthday, Germany attacked Belgium. At dawn the next day, Luftwaffe bombers flew over Steenokkerzeel Castle. 17 occupants left in 3 cars. 2 hours later, the house was burning. Otto later described the raid as a personal gesture of Hitler's hatred toward the Habsburgs. They fled through France to Spain, then across the Atlantic. They reached the US, then Quebec, where Zita and her family lived from 1940 to 1952. She went to Mass every day. Her 4 youngest children studied at Laval University. Her sister-in-law, Charlotte, Grand Duchess of Luxembourg, and her brother, Prince Felix, were also in Quebec during the war years. The former Empress of Austria lived in Quebec for 12 years. She cooked, she prayed, she kept the family together. She waited. In 1952, Zita returned to Europe. At first, she lived in Luxembourg, but 10 years later, in 1962, she moved to Switzerland, to the small village of Zizers in the Alpine canton of Graubünden. A room in a Catholic nursing home, a quiet life. She could not return to Austria. The Habsburg law of 1919 banned members of the dynasty from entering the country unless they renounced all claims to the throne. Zita refused. She would not abdicate. She would not renounce her titles. In her conviction, these titles were given by God and could not be surrendered at the demand of a law passed by the republic that had overthrown her. It was not a whim, it was a principle, and it cost her dearly. In 1971, one of her daughters died in Austria. Zita could not cross the border to attend the funeral. The law made no allowance for a mother wishing to bury her child. She remained in Switzerland, enduring her grief from a distance. In 1982, Austrian courts ruled that the Habsburg law had been unlawfully applied to Zita. She was born a Bourbon-Parma and was Habsburg only by marriage. The law should never have applied to her. After 63 years, she could finally return home. She was 90 years old. More than 20,000 people came to the Mass at St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna. Incapable of fitting inside, they stood on the streets outside. She celebrated her 90th birthday surrounded by 33 grandchildren. Her eyesight was failing. She moved with difficulty. Yet those around her invariably noted that she bore these infirmities with a serenity that resembled readiness more than resignation. She was waiting for death, which would allow her to be reunited with Karl. On March 14, 1989, she died at the St. John's Catholic Home in Scissors. She was 96 years old. The date was April 1st, the anniversary of Karl's death on Madeira. 67 years to the day. Zita's coffin was draped with the imperial funeral pall of the Habsburgs. To the Capuchin church, it was carried by the very same historic carriage that had borne the coffin of Franz Joseph in 1916, a funeral behind which the young empress herself had walked on foot 73 years before. The same carriage, a different world. At least 200,000 people filed past her coffin over the course of 2 days. 8,000 attended the funeral service. More than 200 members of the Habsburg and Bourbon-Parma families arrived. 40,000 people stood in the April rain on the streets of Vienna. Zita was laid to rest in the imperial crypt, alongside 12 emperors and 19 empresses, spanning 4 centuries. Her heart was later brought to Muri Abbey in Switzerland, right next to the heart of Karl, after 67 years of separation. Together, Zita of Bourbon-Parma was Empress of Austria and Queen of Hungary and Bohemia for 2 years and 12 days, in exile for 70 years. She spoke 6 languages. She raised 8 children alone in poverty. She lived in 9 countries. She crossed the Atlantic twice. She escaped a burning house at dawn. She spent 12 years in Quebec. For 63 years, she was banned from entering Austria. She wore black for 67 years, not as theater, not as a political statement, but as exactly what it was, a love that had nowhere else to go. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and leave a like if you want to see more stories like this. Zita's story is woven from hundreds of such details, and if you know a fact I missed today, or if you want to share your thoughts on this incredible destiny, be sure to let me know in the comments. I never miss a single one of your responses. I read everything. See you in the next video.